If you'd like to see any pricing data for the live security tokens, check out stomarket.com. We've got a full table there with all the prices and changes, as well as market caps and volumes and all that other good stuff. So definitely go check that out. But without further ado, I'd love to transition into our main topic this week, which, as we mentioned, is regarding exemptions for launching a global security token offering out of the United States. And so to date, the U.S. has been the leading jurisdiction to issue security tokens. And this isn't to anyone's surprise, because the U.S. has always been a leader in the capital markets by touting the largest, most efficient, and strictest financial markets in the world. But when we look at traditional private and crowdfunding markets inside of the United States, they are primarily focused on targeting U.S. investors exclusively. And issuers mostly used Reg D to target accredited investors and institutions, or more recently, the Reg A Plus or CF exemptions, which enable access to all retail, non-accredited U.S. investors. And so one of the benefits of issuing a security token over the traditional methods is the fact that as an issuer, you can now reach this global audience and investor base. We talk about global interoperability. We talk about global access to assets. These things are crucial, but however, those exemptions that we've mentioned already don't actually allow for onboarding of these non-US investors. And so because it's much more efficient and cost effective to also include international investors, issuers actually need to leverage an additional exemption for this new audience. And so this exemption I'm referencing is known as Reg S. And so the expected standard for a global security token offering is most likely going to consist of a combination of both the Reg D as well as the Reg S in two separate filings. And so keep in mind, as we go into detail here, we're not attorneys, and this is not meant to be any sort of legal advice or counsel, but basically what this means for an issuer is that you need to separate your investors based off of which jurisdiction they're participating from. International, non-US investors cannot invest through a Reg D exemption, and US investors cannot invest through a Reg S. So you need to be very careful. Non-US needs to be Reg S, and U.S. investors need to participate through one of the other exemptions that we've mentioned before. So Herwig, what does this imply for security tokens and what we're looking at moving forward?
I think you just did a great outline of the different exemptions that you can leverage and the different factors between the two. And from a legal perspective, you're kosher, but from a technical perspective, you now need to translate that, right? So it actually means that if you're going to be leveraging both exemptions, you will be issuing two sets of tokens. They will be identical in rights and protections, but distinguished by its ownership conditions. And furthermore, the two different exemptions, Kyle, they actually have different lockup periods too. Again, I am not an attorney, nor is Kyle. If you are exploring an STO, we highly recommend you absolutely should be speaking with an attorney. But they actually have different rules as well. So that means the smart contracts representing the two tokens need to account for identity, the country of residence, and also, of course, for when the tokens are actually transferable. Reg D requires a 12-month lockup period, and Reg S requires only a 6-month. So there's a 6-month difference right there alone that you need to manage two different groups of investors. Standardizing a lockup period for both exemptions was one of the main suggestions that we included in feedback to the SEC, but there has been no illumination on that, and we should have no expectation of that changing. So how marketplaces and exchanges treat the two and how they manage that will be very interesting. And it's for these exact reasons that these exchanges and marketplaces need to do heavy due diligence on smart contracts and protocols that power these security tokens, because they are responsible as facilitators for ensuring the compliance is followed post-issuance. Now, we can get even a little bit more advanced by expanding our audience further. In our original example, we just used a Reg D and a Reg S as a combination. So for those of you listening closely, that means we can raise capital from international investors and from U.S. investors that are considered accredited. This means they're roughly representing the top 10% of wealthiest Americans, either from an income or net asset perspective. And so if you want your STO to be accessible by international investors, accredited investors, and non-accredited investors, aka retail investors, or everybody in the US, then you'll also need to file either a Reg A or a Reg CF exemption, enabling you to access those audiences. Now, of course, Reg A and Reg CF have their own parameters and requirements that you need to follow through, but as I understand it, you can file all of these simultaneously, so you may find yourself doing a Reg CF, a Reg D, and a Reg S exemption all at once for your STO. So the more you can cover, now you can cover pretty much the entire world in just 3 exemptions and issue an STO from within the US, which is pretty spectacular. Before security tokens, even with crowdfunding, going through this process was extremely complicated. The only time Reg S was typically used was to include a specific party that happened to be an international investor, either for tax purposes or they had a predisposed relationship with those individuals. It was not common for a private company to go and raise internationally. Now, thanks to the security token, it is. But Kyle, I wonder how many of our savvy listeners here are willing to go a step further.
Another step.
That's right. I'm talking about the international side now. Surely we now have granted coverage in the U.S. We're following all the SEC guidelines. We've issued the different exemptions. We've covered everybody. But what about the rest of the world's securities laws? Well, in fact, those savvy listeners are right if they assumed that many of the other jurisdictions around the world also have their own rules that need to be followed, many times similar to the U.S. in respect to the accredited investors, or sometimes referred to as sophisticated investors laws.
Right.
So in principle, if you want to truly be 100% compliant, you also need to make sure the international investors you accept also respect their native country's securities laws. Now, many issuance platforms are accounting for this. In fact, many of them are using a company that I founded, full disclosure, Invest Ready, which also covers verifications in the U.S. as well as globally. And this is, of course, all in an effort to make sure that the issuer can efficiently go to market and enable access to the world. So in principle, yes, technology and security tokens make it easier to reach everybody, but you also have to keep in mind each jurisdiction you support, the more laws you need to be aware of and potential regulations that need to be complied with.
Wow. So we're talking about potentially 3 or more different exemptions that you're going to be leveraging, or you may need to leverage if you're a security token issuer. That alone is, I think, reason enough that you definitely need to find the legal advice that fits all of the requirements that you need to help track all of these different pieces that you're going to be leveraging through this process. Additionally, some of the experienced issuance platforms that are in the space already have leveraged dozens of clients and are able to manage what this process looks like. This is nothing necessarily new for them. So it's important to vet all of the different technological providers, potentially even finding a consulting firm that can help you navigate that space as well to find the right pieces to work with is going to be crucial. But I think it's a great breakdown that you've made there, Herwig, in terms of distinguishing between the different regulations. And you cannot forget the fact that you need to make sure that your investors are accredited. If you're doing traditional fundraising rounds, you've got to do the KYC. All those things that we saw were neglected in the 2017, 2018 scene from the crypto space. A lot of these people were not properly identifying their investors, were not properly accrediting their investors, and have to pay hefty fines and deal with a lot of those regulatory smackdowns. So definitely make sure you're getting this stuff straight, because it is complicated. But when you boil it down like that, it does seem pretty straightforward in terms of leveraging specific exemptions for what investors you need.
Absolutely. I hope this episode has been eye-opening for our listeners in the sense of connecting the two between the legal and the regulation versus the technical and the functionality of security tokens. Hopefully we have a better understanding now what the role of issuance platforms play. It's not their job to be the attorney and tell you which regulations to use. It's their job to make sure the technology can support the compliance and regulations for which exemptions you're looking to leverage. Mm-hmm. And because security tokens are a global phenomenon, it is most issuances' prerogative to go ahead and make sure they can support globally all the various exemptions. So again, any feedback, questions, comments people have for the show or they want to see, let us know. We're active on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We'd love to get your input. And with that, Kyle, I believe that's the end of our show.
Yeah, I want to give a couple shout outs to some of our users that have made participated on stomarket.com/news. Shout out to a lot of you guys who are submitting your own articles that you'd like us to cover. You can register for an account and then begin to submit articles for different companies or for different press updates that you'd like us to cover in each podcast episode. So if you're listening, if you'd like to participate, if you'd like us to cover something, definitely shoot that a link, shoot it over there, submit the article, and we'll definitely comb through it and try to do our best to cover it in the episode. So thank you everyone for listening. This is episode 31, and we'll talk to you next week.
Hopefully catch you next week.